So my name's Karen Ptolemy Stam, and I've been the minister here at St. Paul's in Midland for coming up to 9 years. And I've been just simply asked to share what some of you might already be doing yourselves. And our congregation has worked to set up what we are calling a transition steering team. And the reason we're calling it the steering team is because we believe that everyone in the congregation will eventually be part of the team because we'll all be transitioning. And so I just wanted to highlight that this team is 8 people that were appointed by the official board. And it has a dual purposes. One is to start to plan now, even though we have no idea what all of the rules are going to be or the regulations and that, but to begin to think about and put in some place some of the things that we anticipate might be coming down the road to reopen our building. And so that is one of the goals of this team. The second goal is to, at this time, say, things really aren't going to be back to what they were before. And to try to help ourselves as well as the congregation acknowledge that. And so if things aren't going to be the same, what is going to be different? What have we learned? What are some of the things that have happened during COVID-19 that's actually been quite helpful for us? And so that has also been part of what this team is also hoping to do. And that really and truly is to start envisioning the future. And so there's those two elements. I'm just turning my attention for a minute so I can, Karen, will you time me? So if I'm getting close to my time, just let me know, please.
Thank you. Sure. Not a problem.
Thank you so much. So what we're hoping to do is to also do some visioning and to do that with the congregation. So how we are envisioning, whether it actually works out this way, is a whole other thing. But what we're hoping and envisioning is that this team will work together and then they'll start to branch off into different areas, all reporting back to the core group. And then they're going to start to work with all of our various committees. And at St. Paul's, we used to have 24 community groups that share our building. And of course, because of the issue around choirs, which I'll mention in a few minutes, that might be significantly less. And so what we're really trying to do is to be proactive and to allow the Holy Spirit to let us gather some collective wisdom. And so we really are seeing this team as the hub of the wheel. And as you know, a wheel, especially a bicycle, has many spokes. And this hub will be reaching out and having conversations and working with all of the other spokes of the wheel so that together we can all move forward. They are directly accountable to our official board. And it's also, they have been given the task of overseeing and having oversight that whatever we do moving forward, each group is in compliance with our government directives, our medical health directives, and the directives of the United Church of Canada. So how we see this is kind of exciting. And I wanted to talk, before I get into some of the examples of the composition of the team. And you know your congregation, and you might need more than a team of 8. We decided on 8, so it didn't get too unruly in our Zoom meetings. But the motions of the official board also gives this team power to add to the team. And so we kind of were very careful to make sure that we had some folk who were really practical. People who can sit there and figure out, well, how are we going to sanitize? Because sanitizing your building regularly and frequently will be part of it. They might be able to figure out how to get masks. If it's decided we need masks, they'll figure out how many hand sanitizers we need. They will do the math around social distancing. And they will come back with some very practical rules. How do we social distance in this room or in that room, or in the sanctuary, or in the Great Hall? And so we really need some of those very practical people. At the same time, we need some folk who are visionaries, people who can think outside the box, people who can say, well, have you thought of it this way? And in order to do that, we made sure that we had a member on the team who's brand new to the congregation. 6 months into the congregation, 3 months without COVID and 3 months with it. We wanted someone who would be able to see us with new eyes and might not take some of the things that we take for granted and might nudge us in some other directions. And so we also made sure on this team is the chair of the board for us. She is a very important role in our congregation and is certainly a very good communicator. And we also have a person who's spent 22 years of her work experience overseeing 58 organizations of one umbrella organization with 4,000 staff and 15,000 volunteers. And it was her job to develop and manage transition in that organization. So we're a little blessed to have that experience. So how we're looking at this is, I think it's really important for us to know and accept that we don't have answers right now. And we are in a river that is has a really rough current. And so one of the people on the board is a former director of the Canadian Canoe Museum. So he said to us, you know, you folk, we are on the river and we might have to do some long portages to get around obstacles, but we will still get to the river and we still will have our canoe and our paddles. And so God will guide and direct us in the midst of this. So this is the initial idea, and everything happening in future around reopening will be directed to this committee. And so I wanted to give you some examples of what we are hearing. For example, some of our folk, particularly our elderly, are saying to us, you know, even if the church opens, I'm not sure I'm going to go back. It might be a year or two. I'm really scared until we get a virus. And we understand that. But it's not just our elderly. We have a family who've been in this congregation. In fact, one of the members of the steering team, and he's been in this congregation for 70 years. And we also wanted someone with some longevity on our team, but he's also a really neat man. And he said, you know, my wife had cancer last year and she is challenged in her immune system. I'm not sure we're going to be coming back either. So this is really giving us pause to think, how might we continue as we've tried to do during COVID to still be the church, because the building closed. The church certainly didn't. And so that's what we've been really trying to work on. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You may not be aware of this. I was on conversation with the chief medical officer for the province of Nova Scotia, and he is also on our federal medical team that's advising our federal government. And so there were 2,517 of us on this Zoom call. And one of the things that he said, and we knew already because choral societies are telling us the same thing, is that a very high risk thing that people cannot do during COVID is sing. Who knew singing could be so high risk? Very high risk. And so the recommendation coming out in all places and all over is that we might not be able to have our choir for a year or 2 years. And that's a heartache for us anyhow, perhaps for you as well. So already our worship committee has mandated with our M&P committee and given our music director permission now to research, and she is learning how to do a viral choir. And it's a learning curve for her, and I'm grateful it's her, not me. But we know now that we're going to have a virtual choir, and we're looking at software, and she's already experimenting We also know that our live streaming worship is going to be for much longer than just COVID-19 pandemic times. Now, we are a congregation that's been live streaming for 2 years, so live streaming is part of our norm anyhow, but we're going to have to take a very careful look at how our worship is visually to those who are not physically in the building and learn from some of the stuff we're doing now. So that's just one small example of something that's going to need to change. The good news is that someone said to us, if you guys are doing a virtual choir, do you think I could be part of that? So now we might have some people in the community, some people in a neighboring congregation, because we've invited them and their minister is sharing with us at this time in live streaming. And suddenly here's a community outreach and a way to engage the larger community, all due to COVID-19. So this is what we mean by that second part. How do we think outside of the box? How do we continue to be the church, but in new ways? So that's just one little example of some of the things that we're looking at. According to this chief medical officer, Dr. Robert Strang, he also said another high-risk area, but not as high as singing. Oh, and by the way, if we come back to worship, we won't be able to sing in worship either, not just not having a choir. But he said food and distribution of food, preparing of food is a high risk. And he referred us to the province of Alberta, guidelines for places of worship opening up. And I'm sure there's information that will be coming for Ontario as well. But I sent that out to the team, and in that one, Alberta is saying churches cannot serve food until further notice. And so, well, that's a new learning, and how's that going to impact our funeral teas? Obviously, if Ontario chooses to do that, it's going to have a huge impact. But the other question for our church and our congregation, and perhaps for yours, is even if we're allowed to serve food, will we choose to serve food? Is this something we want to place some of our elderly women in particular from the UCW? Do we want to put them in that position? And so the lovely thing about the United Church of Canada is that we are called to collectively gather our wisdom. And each church and congregation will need to figure out for themselves what is really going to work best for them within the guidelines. And so some churches may choose not to open as quickly as they're allowed, and others will be gung-ho. I wanted to give you another example, and for us, a lot of funerals. And so we're also starting to have conversations, and I'm having another conversation this week about a wedding that's now going to be postponed. I've had 3 weddings with all sorts of issues around happening. We might do a live streaming wedding and just have our 5 allowed to be in the church building, and then we'll live stream it, and we might be able to drop in friends and family with comments and toasts and congratulations at the end of it. So we're constantly trying to find ways on how we can do things differently to meet the needs of those who are there. And we could live stream a funeral service, and we can drop videos in with eulogy. We could drop someone in saying a poem. We could drop someone in doing the 23rd Psalm. We could drop a soloist into the system and work with with families in meeting their needs. Another example
Oh, Karen,
that we are,
sorry. I was signaling you by hand, but I maybe need to speak this out loud. If this has just been powerful and wonderful. If you just want to have some closing words now, that would be perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just going to close up then as well. So what I really want to say to folks is really just get together with some of your folk in the congregation. We encourage you to do a steering team to start thinking of these things now, and know that you have the wisdom and you have resources. Shining Waters has been amazing as a regional council. Check their site. They're giving us updates all the time. And trust yourselves that with the guidance of one another and the presence of the Holy Spirit, you'll figure out a way. So that's what I have to share with you. And thanks, Karen. I asked you to be my timekeeper, and I really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for your graciousness, the wisdom, and your enthusiasm and your clarity that this can be a moment of transition that has positive benefits to it as we discern together how we're being called to be as the church by the Spirit. So thank you for that. We are going to invite people to be